Today we'll be reading from 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 1 to 20. The birth of Samuel. There was a certain man in Ramathaim Zophim of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zoph, an Ephrathite. He had two wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other was Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now this man used to go up year by year from a city to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh, where the two sons of Eli, Hophni, and Phinehas were priests of the Lord. On the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah his wife and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her. The Lord had closed her womb. And her rival used to provoke her grievously, to irritate her, because the Lord had closed her womb. So went on year by year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. Therefore Hannah wept and would not eat. And Elkanah her husband said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? And why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons? After they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. And she vowed a vow, and she said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant, and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, now I'll give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was speaking in her heart, only her lips moved, and her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli took her to be a drunken woman. And Eli said to her, How long will you go on being drunk? Put your wine away from you. But Hannah answered, No, my lord, I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for all along I have been speaking out my great anxiety and vexation. Then Eli answered, Go in peace, and the Lord and the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him. And she said, Let your servant find favor in your eyes. Then the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. They rose early in the morning and worshipped before the Lord. Then they went back to their house at Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. And in due time Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Samuel, for she said, I have asked for him from the Lord.
Thank you. Thank you, Wishu. Thank you. So in keeping with KVC tradition, I have a giveaway. But this time, it's not something that you read. Maybe you'll invite me for a meal. It's a cookbook. I don't think I was ready to figure out who to give it to, but I saw her hand up first. So it's a book on holiday recipes. I haven't actually used it, so enjoy. Thank you. So this morning we are going to be sharing from God's Word on what I think is an important role that mothers have as generation shapers. It's difficult sometimes when you're thinking of one child to think of the scope of time that child could influence. And we are used to, maybe because of modern technology, you can zip up timelines going back and forth and then zoom in on a particular time period and zoom in on a particular day. And I think today we'll have that privilege as we look at the passage that we are looking at of the story of Hannah. And the time period in which Hannah lived was the time of the judges. The time of the judges was peculiar. They had just lost Joshua and all the elders who knew Joshua. So all the great deeds that God had done for the people prior to their entry into the land of Israel, even the conquering of all the people who were there. It tells us something quite interesting from Judges chapter 1. It says, "And Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at 110 years. They buried him within the boundaries of his inheritance in that place, in the hill country of Ephraim, north of the mountain of Gash, and all that generation were gathered to their fathers. And there rose another generation after them who did not know the Lord, or the work he had done for Israel." And the period of the Judges has names that you will recognize. You'll probably recognize Ehud, who was quite sly and left-handed and killed one king very slyly. And there's Deborah, who we mention quite often, and Gideon, Samson. All those were in the period of the Judges. But the period of the Judges didn't really improve, because the last verse in the book of Judges says, "In those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did whatever was right in his own eyes." So it was a dark time. And there are some characters who we may be familiar with again, who lived in that period of time. And we know the story of Naomi and Elimelech and Ruth, who became their daughter-in-law. And then we have Eli, the high priest, who we'll mention a bit in this story. Elkanah, Peninnah, and Hannah, who are the main characters for us today. There is Samuel as well, who began his ministry. After that, King Saul, and also the period in which David was anointed as king. So that gives you sort of the timeline that we're looking at. The one before this is, of course, the period of the Judges that we've just read about, and before that is the period of Joshua and the conquering of the land. So you have a mindset of where we are in history. Now, there's us. I guess we think of this story as the story of Ruth, but it begins with Naomi and Elimelech. And you may wonder why, I guess in yours it doesn't have a donkey, mine has a donkey. It was actually not favorable in the time that Naomi and Elimelech chose to go to Moab, because the Moabites were the enemies of the people of God. And for good reason. You remember a guy called Balaam? Now, Balaam was hired by the king of Moab, whose name was Balak, to put a curse on the people of Israel. And he tried, but he didn't succeed. When he did not succeed, somewhere in the midst of this whole event, there was a donkey that spoke to him. You remember that? But when he did not succeed in cursing the people of Israel, he did something that was even worse. He taught Balak how to trip up the people of God. He told him, the best way to get these guys, introduce them to your women. And they did. And they wound up having sexual relationships with the Moabite women. They wound up worshiping the Moabite gods. And you can imagine, this is people who know God. This was during the time of Moses. A plague followed, and 24,000 people died because of that plague. It only stopped because a namesake of one of the priests we'll see today, who was called Phineas, in holy rage, if you could call it that, went and killed a Moabite man who, they were before the temple of the Lord, or the tabernacle, they were repenting. And someone struts along with a Moabite woman and goes into his tent. And Phineas was enraged. He took a spear and killed both of them. And that's how the plague stopped. I don't know whether you get the sense of it's a fearsome thing to fall into the hands of a living God. He is a jealous God. It's easy to edit that out of scripture and make it more comfortable, but it's sometimes not pretty. So what Balaam did, can you imagine Jesus repeated in Revelation when he spoke to John? And he was speaking about the church in Pergamum, and he was saying, there are some among you who have the teachings of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block in front of God's people. Not a great way to be remembered in history. But this was where Elimelech and Naomi chose to go. The irony was, Elimelech and Naomi came from Bethlehem, which is the house of bread. And there was drought in the house of bread, and they went to Moab. So you can see the period of the Judges is quite intense in terms of the events that are happening. And the next story we have, you can see all their names start with L. More likely than not, that L means God. Whatever the other part of the name means, but all of them have a reference that means something to do with God's character. Elkanah means the one that God had taken a hold of, or God has acquired. Now, it's interesting that he does depict the meaning of his name to some extent. This tabernacle that Elimelech and his two wives and the children were going to was maybe not the exact same one. Maybe it had been repaired over time, but it's the same one that Moses had been told by God to build. To very great detail, very specific. The people who have been doing the Bible reading, you have gone through the passages that talk about the thread that needs to make, which curtains and what the poles need to be made of and what the bases need to be made of. So it was not made out of human imagination. It was a very specific design that was given to Moses for them to build the tabernacle by. And the tabernacle also was important for this reason. God has chosen throughout history to be found among his people. And the tabernacle was the place that represented his presence among his people. So for the Israelites, there were prescriptions of where they needed to go and when they needed to go up to the tabernacle to give offerings. So Elkanah and his family were doing what was prescribed in the book of Exodus, Leviticus, probably Numbers, in going up to the tabernacle to give their offerings. And remember, the context is the context of the book of Judges. This was not popular. There were not many people who were doing what these guys were doing. And in a sense, by going up to Shiloh, where the tabernacle was, every year, they were acknowledging the presence of God amongst his people. So we'll take a bit of a detour here to talk about why we gather on a Sunday morning. The shift that happened, you'll see on the next slide, the shift that happened when Jesus died on the cross is that, you remember when he had that conversation with the Samaritan woman? We've done it recently when we've been doing the book of John. Jesus told the Samaritan woman that a day is coming when you will neither go to Jerusalem or here on this hillsides in Samaria. You will not worship God there, but the people who worship God will worship him in spirit and in truth. When Jesus was talking to the Pharisees, again, he said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days, I will build it again. What was he talking about? He was talking about his body. He called it a what? That was interesting. I'd never really noticed that. I thought that the first time that a human body is named a temple is when Paul talks about it in Corinthians, but Jesus actually mentions it before his death. And so remember, the tabernacle was representative of the presence of God amongst his people. And that's the name Emmanuel. You can see L again. Emmanuel, God with us. And in the Old Testament, they would say, the Lord your God is in your midst. But in a transition happened with Christ's death and with the beginning of the church that now Paul speaks about when he says, and I want you to keep in mind, this is Paul. He is not someone who's come to faith from among the nations. He is a Jew himself. He is not just a Jew, he is a zealous Jew. He held the clothes of the people who stoned Stephen, and this was in Jerusalem. So he worshipped at the temple. He was persecuting Christians because they were desecrating, spoiling this great faith that he believed in so strongly. So when we hear Paul say these words, I don't know whether you get the weight of it. This is a Jew of Jews, as he describes himself, saying these words. Do you, plural, not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? When the tabernacle was built, Moses completed the job. The presence of God came down onto the tabernacle, and Moses and Aaron could not go in. Now, transition through time, you can see the temple that was built by Solomon, and later on was destroyed and then rebuilt. I don't know whether you get the gravity of that statement. Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? Collectively, individually. That is extremely, I don't know what to say. I don't know what's the right adjective to describe it. Because if people were to do a pilgrimage today to the holiest site on earth, should they go to Jerusalem? Should they go to Mecca? I propose that they should come to a place like this, where God's people are gathered. Because he says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in their midst. So what we do on a Sunday morning is a holy thing. And we are encouraged, do not give up the habit of meeting together. Because it is here that we experience the presence of God together. It is here that he reveals himself amongst his people. Yes, you individually are the temple of God, no doubt. But collectively, more so we are. I think I've given the answer to the trivia question. Which is the most holiest site on earth? Where can you go? You know now. So, Elkanah, Peninnah, and Hannah were at Shiloh, probably offering sacrifices to God. Among those sacrifices, again, I will keep pushing in on the daily Bible reading. We heard that there were some sacrifices that were made that they were allowed to then sit with family and share. And this is probably a moment like that when Peninnah, Elkanah, and Hannah would sit down and share a meal that they had offered as a sacrifice to God. And Elkanah was generous to his family. He prepared the sacrifices that each person would make. Peninnah got her share, her children got their share, but he gave a double portion to Hannah. And maybe this was his way of comforting her. But Peninnah was not happy. She taunted Hannah for her childlessness. And she did not do this once. As faithfully as they went to Shiloh was as faithfully as Peninnah taunted Hannah. Every single time they went, she taunted her for not having children. This may be a reflection of Peninnah adapting to the culture that they were in at that time, where people did not know God, people did not remember the deeds of God in their time or in the time past. And maybe Peninnah is a reflection of that. But Elkanah told something to Hannah. He loved her, and he told her, as she cried from the taunts that Peninnah gave, he comforted her and said, "Am I not better to you than 10 sons?" At the risk of being called tribal, I want you to imagine a Maasai man saying that. When he tells his wife, "Am I not better to you than 10 sons?" it is not a casual statement. It probably means that any amount of labor that 10 sons would have done for Hannah, he did. Any provision that 10 sons would have provided for Hannah, he provided. It was not just a statement of comfort. He probably met it in actual value in the life of Hannah, that she would not suffer for not having children. And he overdid it. He did it 10 times over. The interesting thing is that we don't seem to hear Hannah's voice. She doesn't respond to Peninnah. She doesn't respond to Elkanah. But we do hear that she stands up and she goes, draws closer to the tabernacle and goes to pray. Now, the tabernacle was a place that the priests were responsible for taking the offerings that were brought by the people of Israel and giving on behalf to the Lord, whether there were things that needed to be slaughtered, things that needed to be waved, whatever it was, whatever sort of sacrifice, they were offered by the priest. And there were probably people milling around. She didn't have a quiet corner necessarily to go and talk to God about what she was thinking about. And we are told that Eli, the high priest, and Sherry, you're here, pole sana for your loss. But it occurs to me you have the name Cohen, which is a priestly name. And here, this is the high priest, the Cohen, among the Jews. And he is sitting at the corner. I'm not sure why it is that he is not serving. It seems that he had given the responsibility to his sons. But for whatever reason, Eli's attention is drawn to Hannah. But she's unconscious of whatever attention she has drawn. She is deeply distressed and she's in prayer. She is weeping bitterly to God. And she asks for a son. I found that interesting. She did not ask for a child. She asked God for a son. But she also made a vow, and she told the Lord that she would offer this child to him all his days, and he would be a Nazarite. Probably the most famous Nazarite we know is Samson, who probably doesn't leave us with a very good feeling about what Nazarites were, but so that was Peninnah's promise to the Lord if he gave her a son. I hesitate to compare it to a bargain, and I guess you'll understand why as we go along with this story. But when we get to this place, you realize that there's some similarities to Hannah's situation, to a story that will zip back now again, many hundreds of years before this, to another family. And this family is the family of Jacob. Similar to Elkanah, Jacob also had 2 wives. And similar to Elkanah, Jacob also had 1 wife who was barren. And the 2 wives who were barren really wanted to have children. And although it's not clear for Penina, that's why I have a question mark. It's not clear, but it would seem that the 2 wives who had children, what they wanted was the love of their husband. It seemed the one who was barren had the love of the husband, and the one who had children did not feel they had the love of the husband. And maybe the differences would be that Elkanah and Jacob responded differently to their wives, and Hannah and Rachel responded differently to their situations. So Jacob and Rachel, let me go back a bit. Leah and Rachel. Leah and Rachel were sisters, but I don't know whether there was anything sisterly about their relationship. They fought hard for many, many years. The symbols the memorial stones of their conflict, unfortunately, can be found in the names they gave to their children. Leah was the first to have children, and her first son, Reuben, is named Reuben, which means see, a son. And this was her reason: because the Lord has looked upon my affliction, for now my husband will love me. I don't know how you would feel walking around with such a name. When someone asks you, what's the meaning of your name? Simeon means hard. And here is the rationale she gave: because the Lord has heard that I am hated, and he has given me this son also. Levi means attached. And she says, now, for sure, this time, my husband will be attached to me because I have borne him 3 sons. And then when she gave birth to Judah, she said, the meaning is praise. This time, I will praise the Lord. Have you ever wondered why God chose Judah to be the family line of Christ? Might it be that he was the only son for whom these mothers raised a memorial stone to the Lord and not to their conflict? I'm not saying it is. I said, might it be? Let's look at Rachel. By the time her sister got these 4 sons, Rachel had just about had it. And I don't know whether her words sound like she was shaking Jacob. It almost sounds like she was, because she says, give me children or I'll die. She had been changed from who was met by Jacob at the well. She was a shadow of her former self. The confidence was gone. Now she's weighed down by jealousy for her sister. And Jacob gives her a very curt answer. He just says, am I in the place of God? Who held you? Who held from you the fruit of the womb? That's a tough one. That's a tough one. It seems hard to place something that heavy on God's doorstep. But yet the interesting thing is that even when Leah began to have children, the Bible says it was the Lord who opened her womb. I think there's a way that we almost go on autopilot. We almost feel that a woman is born with an on switch for having children. We somehow miss the fact that that on switch belongs to God. It doesn't come automatically switched on. The other thing that we might miss is that every single child, according to Psalm 139, is knit in their mother's womb by the Lord. Not one child, no matter what the circumstance of their conception, is knit by anyone but the Lord in their mother's womb. And that's why Scripture can say, children are a gift. The circumstance through which they came might be difficult, but the child who came through that circumstance is a gift. God's grace is powerful enough to cover every situation in which a child is conceived. And he chooses every single child who is conceived for himself. Each child belongs to him. And I wonder if this is what Hannah saw. When she was comforted, even before she received Samuel, was that what she saw? And might it be what Leah and Rachel missed? Did the dust raised by their feuding jealousy raise a cloud over the children who were specially created with a place in the Lord's heart in history or his story and in eternity? So you would have thought that part 2 of the naming of the children would be better. But it didn't really get better. I'll skip over the children of the maidservants, but Rachel is the one who began after she had shaken her husband and said, "Give me children." She gave her maidservant Bilhah to Jacob. And since Leah had stopped having children, she did the same thing. She gave her maidservant to Jacob as well to have children. But at some point in time, the Lord opened Rachel's womb and she gave birth to her first son. This is what she said: "God has taken away my reproach and called his name Joseph," which means, may he add. May the Lord add me another son. Even close to her death, which was many years later, because in between here, Jacob went and left his father-in-law, went and met his brother Esau. So there was a period of time between the time Rachel got Joseph and when she got Benjamin. But even when she was close to death, giving birth to Benjamin, when she was told by the traditional birth attendant that she had just born another son, she named him Ben-Oni, son of my sorrow, or son of my strength. Jacob renamed him Benjamin, which means son of my right hand. Had these two women not yet seen? Jacob had said, "It is the Lord who opens your womb." But they gave their children names that were memorial stones of their conflict. I don't know whether it's only Judah who had a name that was a memorial stone to the Lord. If you look at these sons, these 12 sons of Jacob, they never really got to a time of rest. Even when they were in Egypt, the older brothers were always afraid of what Jacob could do now that the shoe was on the other foot and he was the one in power. Even to the point that their father was dying, they were still not convinced that Jacob would not revenge against what they had done to him. But where did all this conflict begin? Did it begin with their mothers? Now, in Egypt, we meet another mother, and her name is Jochebed. I don't know whether you knew who Moses' mother was. I should have made that a trivia question. But Jochebed was also living in a very dark time. This was the time that Pharaoh was killing. Wait. That's a new one. Moses was killing the Israelite babies. And when she saw her newborn son, Old English, it says he was a goodly child. I don't know what goodly means. But he was a fine child. For whatever reason, was it her eyes? Was it her inner eyes? What did she see in this child? The interesting thing, we don't know, it is not recorded. Did Moses have age mates? Or did they all die? We don't know. But Jochebed saw Moses and said, this one is not dying. For those who have newborns, I hear a newborn somewhere. I hear a baby somewhere. How hard is it to keep a child silent? A 3-month-old child silent. Jochebed hid Moses in the house for 3 months. And you can imagine, Pharaoh's soldiers are probably, they have spies, they just want to hear a whiff of a sound that there is a child somewhere in a house so that they can go and get him. But Jochebed succeeded. She hid Moses for 3 months. And after that, she made an ark for him, a tiny one. Put it in a river and send the big sister Miriam take care of that one. And Miriam was also very sly. When the daughter of Pharaoh found it, she said, do you want me to find someone to raise that baby for you? I know someone who can help. And took it back straight to the mother. So you can imagine Jochebed must have been paid for raising her own baby. But we'll ask her when we go to heaven. But that was a mother's instinct. Looked at a child and said, this is a goodly child. The destiny of the people of Israel hinged on that child. His being raised in Pharaoh's house probably exposed him to a level of freedom that no other young boy knew in his time. Could it be that the perspective of freedom that Moses got from living in Pharaoh's house was the perspective that allowed him to imagine what was possible for the people of God? When God said, go and set my people free. Was that the perspective that he had gotten from living in Pharaoh's house? But yet in Hebrews we hear in the Hall of Fame that he despised being in the world and identified himself with the people of God. Another mother. So let's go back to Hannah. So Hannah had caught Eli's attention. But for whatever reason, again, Eli did not have discernment. When she looks at this woman, I don't know whether I'm the only one. When you see a woman weeping, and you see a woman muttering, do you think she's drunk? Again, this may be a depiction of the time they were in, and we'll get to hear more when we hear about Eli's sons. It may be that the only template for a woman's behavior that Eli had was the template of these women of that generation who did not know God or the things that he had done for Israel, and who had therefore adopted the traditions of the people in Canaan. Maybe that's what he was measuring her by. So let's look at who these sons of Eli were. Hophni and Phinehas. Remember the other Phinehas, who was filled with holy anger and wanted to do justice for the sake of God. But this one was a different Phinehas. This was the son of Eli. As we've learned again, I will not stop saying, in the daily Bible reading that happens from 8:45 to 9 p.m. every day, every weekday, we've learned that when the people of Israel, or rather when the Levites were being taken on as the priests, the whole of Israel, I guess through the representatives of their leaders, laid hands on them before their consecration to the Lord. So the priests were not serving in their own capacity. They were there representing the people of Israel. They were not there for their own purposes. And again, it's not clear why Eli did not serve, but Phinehas and Hophni were in charge, and they had a bad reputation. You can read that in 1 Samuel chapter 2. They made demands on the people who are offering sacrifices. If you see this guy on this side, he's holding some sort of fork, and it's a 3-pronged fork. But what Phinehas and Hophni used it, they asked their servants, as people were boiling meat for the sacrifices, the servants would poke the fork into the meat and pick their choice of the meat they wanted to have. That's not what we read when we were reading Exodus and Leviticus. There were specific portions that were for the priests. Even for the burnt offerings, they'd stop someone from giving a burnt offering and say, no, before you give, let me take my piece. They were making demands on the worshippers. I hope you're hearing what I'm saying without saying. The other thing that Hophni and Phinehas did, which may explain why Eli thought that Hannah was a worthless woman. Take note of that word, worthless. Hophni and Phinehas were having sexual relations with women who were serving at the entrance of the tabernacle. Does that even sound remotely like the tabernacle that was built by Moses? It would seem that they had taken the traditions, maybe from other books in the Old Testament, where there used to be temple prostitutes. Maybe they had picked those habits and brought them to the tabernacle of God. But these were the priests. I hope you're hearing what I'm saying without saying. These were men of the cloth. So why were Hophni and Phinehas called worthless men? In the NIV it says they were called scoundrels. They were wicked, without profit. It is because sin has no profit. Sin has no profit. The person who thinks that they are gaining by sinning has invited who? What does John 10:10 say? That the devil is? What does he do? So you have opened the door for the thief. He will do what he knows best how to do. He will steal. he will kill, he will destroy. That's what sin does. It opens the door. And where you think you're gaining, you're actually losing. And this is clear from Psalm chapter 1. In the beginning verses of Psalm, as it describes the person who delights in the law of the Lord, it says that they are like a tree. You can imagine a tree that's planted by water. It's thriving, evergreen, fruitful, strong, tall. For those ladies who attended Ladies' Night Out 2 months ago, was it? I think we shared this part, and I don't know whether you feel the insult after someone describing the righteous as this grand tree that is evergreen, tall. You can imagine all those adjectives, fruitful. And then it says, the wicked are not so. The writer doesn't even bother to enumerate the things he has said before. He just says, the wicked are not so. He goes further to add insult to injury, and he says, they are like chaff. Now, put the picture of that tree here, and then do. Isn't that what women do when they're winnowing? You go to a windy spot, and your rice, your beans, your maize, you make sure the wind there's a good draft, and you pour it out. The wind will do the job for you. It will get rid of the chaff for you. How is it? Can you imagine that contrast? One is a stately, evergreen, grand, fruitful tree. And he just says, chaff. Why would we make such a choice? And this is the choice that Hophni and Phinehas were making. Even if they were serving God in the tabernacle, they did not know the God they were serving. They despised the sacrifices that people were making to their God. And they themselves defiled themselves and defiled the holy things, because there were very specific instructions about how the priests were to purify themselves before they go into the tabernacle to sacrifice. These guys had, I don't know, for those who understand Kikuyu, onarukofe. Not an ounce of shame, not one. They didn't feel it. Their consciences had been seared by the constancy of their sin. And they were blinded to the consequences of their disobedience. The psalmist in Psalm 73 shows what consequence would happen as godly people watch wicked people prospering. And he says he had started to feel some way. He was very discouraged. He was very disillusioned. And he asked himself, why do I bother? Why do I bother keeping my heart pure? Why do I bother keeping my hands clean? Look at these wicked people. The descriptions in probably mother tongues are quite vivid. He says their stomachs are fat, and their skin is slick, and they don't have trouble like other people. I don't know whether you're getting pictures. And because they don't seem to have trouble, then they wear pride as their necklace, and their mouths strut the earth. They can say anything. But the perspective of the psalmist in Psalm 73 changed when he went into the house of the Lord. This same sanctuary, because it's God's promise, remember. The sanctuary was God's promise to be among his people. It's when the psalmist in Psalm 73 went to the same tabernacle that he saw the end of the wicked. And he says, you have placed them on a slippery slope. And when they go down, they are not coming up. And Hophni and Phinehas probably can give you a picture of how quickly that slippery slope happens. You remember the battle that happened, and they carried the ark of the Lord in presumption because they were not serving a God that they knew. They went marched into the battlefield with the ark of the Lord, and what happened? They both died, and the ark of the Lord was stolen by the Philistines. Which is another humorous story. You need to read that part about Dagon and what would happen every morning as the people of the Philistine town, wherever the Philistine town was, that the ark was. And they'd have to go and pick up their gods and put them back together because they had fallen in the night in front of the ark of the Lord. And the next day they'd have to come and pick it up again. They were not getting it. But also, the other thing that happened to the Philistine towns, they started tossing the ark like a hot potato because any place the ark went, there was a plague. And they said, oh, don't give it to us, don't give it to us, don't give it to us. And they'd pass it on to the next town until they finally had it and they sent it back to Israel on a cart drawn by cattle. So, question. In our time, it's quite dark. Are you discouraged bringing up your children in this generation? God has shown that he is always with his people, no matter how dark it is. But not only that, he is now not just among his people, he is within his people. And he shows that ever so strongly when we are gathered together. From the story of Rachel and Leah, are you missing God moments? Are you raising memorial stones to the wrong things? Or are you raising memorial stones to the Lord? And what have you put in the place of God? Are you like Jacob? Are you like Rachel shouting at Jacob, give me a son? What is it that you want? Who is it that you're asking it from? Are you asking it from the Lord, or are you turning to people, demanding that they give it to you? How do you see your children? Are they a means to achieve your own goals? Or are you in partnership with God like Rachel was with God? Not Rachel, Hannah was with God. When Samuel was weaned, Hannah kept her promise and took him to the temple. The interesting thing is that it says that Samuel grew in the presence of the Lord. I thought this verse was said first of Jesus, but apparently it was said first of Samuel. It says, and Samuel grew in stature and in favor with God and man. That's the first person it is said of. It was first said of Samuel, because there was a generation shaper called Hannah. Are you discouraged looking at all the scandals that are happening around? Or are you discouraged looking at our political situations and wondering how the people who got there? How are they the ones in power? Have you kept your hands clean in vain? Do not turn to them. Rather, enter in the presence of the Lord and gain perspective. And your heart, has it been hardened by sin? Like Phinehas and Hophni. Have you seen, like the psalmist wrote in Psalm 71, God does not see. There is no knowledge in the Almighty, and continue in wickedness? No. Peter said in 2 Peter 3:9, he says, God is not slow to fulfill his promise, as some may count slowness, but is patient towards you, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance. Don't take it that when God is not correcting you, it's that he doesn't see. He is being patient, waiting for your repentance. He was patient with Hophni and Phinehas, but they did not get it. So, in this dark time, it's still possible to experience God, because that is his promise. He has promised to be among his people. May we not be that generation that forgets who the Lord is. May we not forget the deeds that he has done for his people. And I don't know whether you would want to respond to God in any way for any of the many things that are reflected to us in the story of Hannah. I would invite the prayer team and the elders and pastors to come and pray with those who would need it, and then we will close.